In today's Microdose Pro podcast episode, I have a co-host, and my co-host is Djai Baaten, our resident clinical director, psychologist, and neuropsychologist. Together, we have a chat with Bodhi. He is a student at the University of Amsterdam and wrote his thesis on microdosing in the workplace. His findings are insightful and fascinating. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Hello, everyone. Here we are with Djai Baaten, our resident clinical director and neuropsychologist, and Bodhi as well. He wrote a thesis on microdosing in the workplace, and we thought we'd take the time and unpack it for you here during this podcast episode, just to find out a little bit more about what inspired him and how we got here and what we've learned. So, Jai,
Good
hello.
afternoon.
Did I butcher your title again?
No, you did it right, I
No,
think.
I hope not.
I don't care that much. It's just some words.
Well, you're our resident superhero. And thank you, Bodhi, for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. I know you're very busy, but tell us a little bit about yourself and about this thesis.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for having me on. First and foremost, I'm a big fan of Microdose Pro, your products, and the brand. So cool to have this conversation. Yeah, I did a thesis last year for my final master's year of entrepreneurship here in Amsterdam. Um, so I had to write a thesis, and I was thinking, okay, how can I make this the most fun to write a thesis? And yeah, I'm a big fan of microdosing, and it helped me in many ways. So I figured, why not try to write it about microdosing? Um, I think I started microdosing when I was 19 years old. And in that time, I heard about it before I started. I heard, these common stories about how it started in Silicon Valley, how all these young tech professionals started microdosing in these startup environments. Um, so as I was doing entrepreneurship, I was thinking maybe I can combine this cool topic of microdosing and combine it with entrepreneurship. Um, so I did. Yeah.
What has microdosing brought into your life personally?
Um, yeah. So at the time, I was really interested in microdosing because I had these associations that it would help me write a book in a few hours and learn a new language by listening to a few podcasts. I think it also had to do something with the movie Limitless, for those who know. Uh, yeah, I just saw it and then I heard about microdosing, so I thought I have to try this. But the funny thing was that it didn't help me in a performance way per se. It helped me more to lift my mood in a way that I feel like it provides some sparkling to a day. Um, and it helps me in a more social way. I think I get more extroverted a bit, more confident a bit, more talkative. So those are a few ways that it helped me mostly. Always gets different direction depending on the day, but those two things I would say help me the most. So that's a bit on my personal experience with microdosing.
I love that.
So it's just, yeah, sorry, go
Yeah, I
ahead,
love
Jai.
that. And love how you start off with saying, like, here's the things that I expected from it. Turns out it didn't do all those things, but it did something else that instead helped me in ways that I didn't feel I needed help.
Yeah, yeah, it was really fun, really interesting. Yeah, so that's why I also really believed in microdosing. Instead of it being a self-fulfilling prophecy, it obviously wasn't, as it gave me a lot of things that I didn't expect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can imagine. maybe some people experience this, that you kind of have to recalibrate a little bit, or maybe adjust your expectations as you go. How is that for you?
Yeah, it's always yeah, a sort of journey. It takes a period of microdosing, in my mind, to really experience what it does for you, and how it helps you on a daily basis. Um, and also not per se during the microdosing period, but I feel like it can also bring something in the future after you finished a period of microdosing, because it sort of integrates maybe some new habits in your life. So yeah, it's not, in my mind, microdosing doesn't help you just those few days, but it takes a while, and it can really stick in your life. So yeah, that's my experience with it. Um, do you agree, Jai? Do you have the same perspective on it, or have you heard many other things?
No, I do agree with what you say, and I think Asha will be on my side if I say that, the microdosing is not only about the effects or the benefits that you get in the moment while you're taking it. Actually, if done right, in my opinion, it brings way more than that. So the period after microdosing, when you integrate everything, the new things that came up and the new stuff that you've learned along the way, that's where the real change happens in the end.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
It's this is when, the whole meaning, true meaning, and practical manifestation of neurogenesis and neuroplasticity shows itself. Because, okay, we go in expecting ABC, but it's not a pharmaceutical medication. It's going to give us what we need, like an adaptogen would, rather than what we expect from it, because we're probably not conscious of where we're out of balance, but we just know something's off. And so it will give us what is suitable for us. How it has this intelligence, we don't know yet. So that's another conversation. But also, like you said, the benefits can come after the microdosing cycle. It's like building a muscle. If you go to the gym, nobody expects a result in a week. I do, but I know I'm unrealistic. So, but if you're a normal person, it takes 3 months, 6 months, and by the end of the year, you're a different person. And working out probably means that you have better boundaries at work. Working out means that you can climb up the stairs without getting out of breath. There's all of these downwind benefits that are seemingly unrelated but are so beneficial. And also, that's what neurogenesis is, right? It's the optimization of connection between synapses. Instead of this path that is inefficient, it is calibrated to be more efficient than it was previously and then reinforced. And so you have the downstream effects of, like, I haven't microdosed this year or for a few months, and yet I'm still doing better. I'm still hitting certain landmarks. There's still things that are improving on my side. I just got to know how to pay attention.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that was a similar experience for you when you wrote the thesis. Certain expectations, certain assumptions that obviously had to be debunked. Perhaps it was yours, perhaps it was the ones of the participants. And then by the end of the thesis, did you arrive at the same place or did you arrive at another place?
Um, well, maybe just in a nutshell for those who are listening, or watching. So my thesis looked at the experiences of microdosing in the workplace, in a startup environment. Um, so so what I did was I looked at the literature, firstly, before starting the my thesis, the research, and there were many papers on microdosing, where they looked at participants in a lab setting, and but I wanted to try to look at microdosing participants while they were doing what they're mostly doing, what are microdosing, which is just having their normal daily life. So for example, working. And because I did entrepreneurship, I looked at a startup environment. So it is a case study. So I looked at one startup where a group of employees started a microdosing period for 1 month. And then I looked at a few different aspects. So, firstly, I looked at the individual experiences. So, what do the employees of this company who are microdosing experience of the microdosing? So, do they have a better focus? Are they more creative? How is it to microdose at work? And I also looked at the more general company as a whole. So does it affect maybe the relationships between employees who are microdosing, who are not microdosing, but also does it have an effect on the company turnover or the company culture? So a few different aspects. Um, yeah, that's my research, and yeah, I think I was just mainly blank before starting starting the research. Of course, you have some ideas about what's going to happen, and you secretly you hope that it's going to be very interesting. That maybe they're going to argue with the employees who are not microdosing and are saying, "Oh my God, they're doing quote unquote drugs." But I try to be as neutral as possible. Um, but still, there were no fights, but there were still really interesting results in the end.
Uh, I have one question, Bodhi, because I read your thesis. And I really loved it, by the way. I think it's
Thanks.
very good research, and we need more qualitative research in the field. I believe all the stuff that is in your research is very insightful. One of the things that I really loved was that you included the parts about rituals.
Hmm.
Do you mind explaining a little bit more about the reasoning behind that, or maybe starting off with what's rituals have to do with entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so for me, including the part of a ritual was very interesting, as because mostly microdosing is done alone. But in a company, if you want to create a maybe a safe space, um, it's probably good, a nice way to have this open environment where you can talk about it. So in this particular case, the company really discussed it openly with each other, with the employees, and they decided to do it kind of together with a group of the employees. And yeah, really including this kind of feeling that we're doing it together, um, with an end goal. They didn't really made that clear, but yeah, it's not just that a few are doing it randomly and they'll just do it for their own. No, it's a company thing, with a sort of standard procedure, which made it more like a ritual instead of a random microdosing practice.
Yeah, yeah. Because all the employees use the standard protocol, right? The Fadiman protocol,
Yeah.
where you take.
Yep.
So the all the participants in this study, they use the standard protocol, right? The Fadiman protocol, where you take the microdose 1 day on, and then you have 2 days off, and
Hmm.
then 1 day on. And you say that they were taking it together, so everybody was synchronized on the same days with
They started
microdosing.
together, and so the first week they did it together, and then afterwards it became kind of a blur because you know some employees were working another day, some were taking a few days off. So uh, after that, it uh, kind of switched, but they started and they ended together.
Okay, cool. So I'm curious, like you set out to do qualitative research. How exactly did you tackle this? What was your method of
Yeah.
investigating?
So, because it was going to be a qualitative research in a sort of new topic that hasn't been researched before, um, it was going to be a really explorative research. So what I did was I utilized what they call a data triangulation. So I used the methods of interviews. Observations, participant observations, and business documents, company documents. So by triangulating these three types of data, you can get a better sense of the whole context. So not just interviewing the participants, but also get a feel for how do they interact or what kind of company culture do they have. And in this way, the thesis was able to get a more comprehensible analysis of the whole ritual. So that was the starting point. Um, and then the participants did the Fadiman Protocol. But at the start of the practice, the whole period, I interviewed the employees. So both the microdosing employees, but also the employees who didn't microdose, um, including.
What was the division? Like, was it about 50-50, or were there only a few people who were
Yeah, it
microdosing and
was
the rest of them weren't? I'm,
50-50.
I'm
And
curious.
in both groups, there were two founders. One founder was microdosing and one founder was not microdosing. So that was also nice to have
Okay.
both founders in a different group. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I did one round of interviews at the start of the microdosing period and then the other round at the end. Um, let's see. Yeah. So they did the psilocybin mushrooms, which were supported by Microdose Pro, um, and they did the microdosing by themselves. So they decided for themselves how much they wanted to consume, and then they consumed it for 1 month at least. So a few um, also were still doing it afterwards, but because the research was 1 month, we decided to do it 1 month. So the last round of interviews were 1 month later. Yeah.
Okay.
I've got questions. So, what I'm curious, what were the concluding beliefs between the microdosers and the non-microdosers? Was it a big contrast? And also, my other question, a follow up to a follow up: has there been a follow up with the team since the experiment?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked because this month, actually, from coming week onwards, we're gonna do next round of interviews to look back on the research. So I've teamed up with my supervisor and two professor colleagues of his to build upon my thesis and hopefully make it a full publication in the future. So yeah, we're gonna do a look back with the company the coming month. So excited for that. And your other question was.
What was the was there a big contrast at the end of the month-long experiment between the microdosers and the non-microdosers? Because in your study, you mentioned um, higher emotional resilience, if you will. So
Mhm.
there was a softening in that sense, better listening, more creativity, maybe a bit more humor, improved morale. So all of that really nice, good stuff. But then on
Mhm.
the other side, there was a drop or easier management of annoyance, aggression, and all the stuff that's probably less desirable. I don't
Mhm.
know if competition was probably reduced. I don't know if that, but like I'm just those two levers, the way they both optimized, I wonder how that manifested by the end between the two groups, the microdosers and the non-microdosers.
Yeah, I think what was really interesting about this company in particular is that they were very, very open-minded to begin with, which was also probably the reason that they started this microdosing practice. Um, so at the end of the research, when I asked, for example, the non-microdosers, well, what did you think of the last month that your colleagues were microdosing? And some were saying, "Oof, yeah, I didn't even notice. I almost forgot that they were microdosing because it's such a open environment that it's not really a weird thing for them." Of course, at the start, it was kind of exciting for them. So they made some jokes and, they talked about it. But after 1 or 2 weeks, it was not really a thing that they were paying attention to anymore.
And building on that, did you see maybe in some of the people who didn't microdose a shift in attitude towards it? So maybe people that were in the beginning like, I'm microdosing, no, I'm not touching that, I don't want anything to do with that. That after working together with other people who were microdosing and experiencing them, might have a different view on it by the end of the study.
Yeah, um, yeah. All the participants were pretty acceptive of microdosing, but the non-microdosers were at the beginning pretty hesitant to try it out. But yeah, after, of course, talking to their colleagues who were saying positive things, they told me that if they were going to do it another time, they would probably try it out. Yeah, yeah,
Oh, that's cool.
Were
yeah. It was.
there any measurable effects or any mention of the improved morale or performance in the
Yeah, so
microdose?
measurable is pretty difficult, right? Because
Or
it's
noticeable?
yeah, noticeable. Yeah. So the main results for the individuals who microdosed were that they all experienced an increased focus. They were more concentrated during work, and what was interesting is that this really went hand in hand with an altered time perception, which was really fun. They usually told me, yeah, I felt like I was really concentrated. I had a really big focus, and I noticed it because the hours went by really fast. I was working, I was typing, and then 4 hours later, I was like, "Whoa, is it this time already?" I did so much work. I didn't even notice that I was typing for hours. So those two aspects, so the increased focus and the shortened time perception, were two main results that went hand in hand. And another big one was that they felt that it lowered their stress levels, it lowered their anxiety levels. One participant I remember told me that every Monday morning he's really stressed because it's such a busy week again. But then when he tried microdosing, he noticed, wow, today and this morning on Monday morning I was really relaxed. I was like, okay, I know the mountain that lies ahead, but I will manage it. So that's just one example of the quotes. One of the quotes that I received. So with regards to individuals, it was those three. So concentration, time perception, lowered stress. Um, but I also have to mention the negative effects, of course, which were really insignificant compared to the positive ones, but still they were mentioned. So a few participants mentioned that they had these kind of physical discomforts. Uh, so
Can you say that again? A few participants said what?
the slight physical discomforts.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, so they mentioned, for example, that they felt a little bit jittery, that it felt like they had too much coffee, and that they focused a little bit too much on these physical sensations. But they also told me that compared to the positive outcomes really were way more important. Um, and on a collective level for the company, um, the research showed that there was a slight increase in open-mindedness. They felt like they mentioned that okay, our company is pretty open-minded to begin with, but uh, um, this practice really showed to all the employees that it's okay to experiment with whatever you want. It's okay to talk about these things. These things will be accepted. So this really generated an increase in open-mindedness. And apart from that, it was there were no really significant effects in the way that, for example, the colleagues were communicating with each other, or there were no differences in turnover, stuff like that. So those were the main results of the research.
Very cool. When you talked about concentration length and a change in time perception, those are very similar to the criteria for flow state.
Actually, those are the criteria for
Ah,
flow
And
let's
then the
state.
go.
consequence, and then the consequence of a flow state is
Yeah,
improved mental well-being, increased resilience, less stress, and so on and so
Oh,
forth.
wow, really?
Yeah.
No.
Well, the third metric for flow state is that you're doing something that's challenging.
Okay.
So you're kind of being pushed to, you have to concentrate because it's like it's just a little bit more than you're comfortable with, but
Hmm.
it's not undoable. You're just in that sweet spot of like, okay, I'm climbing a different mountain,
Hmm.
and I got to use kind of, new skills and really pay attention, but it's not undoable. So those are the three metrics. Yeah.
yeah. Actually, I took a quote from your thesis that described to me someone. Well, that has someone that describes something that definitely sounds like a flow state to me. Um, it says there was this one time where I had this significantly improved focus, and that's when I truly noticed. Okay, this is definitely because of the truffles. I have an incredible focus. And I just wanted to keep working and typing. And although I normally can concentrate and focus pretty well, I don't really need it. But in that moment, I was completely immersed in my activity, and I feel like that is basically someone talking about being in a flow state, being completely caught in what it is that you're doing. That all the other stuff around you kind of just disappears. You have this tunnel vision, and yeah, that can feel really, really well. It feel really good.
Well, when you're
But there was this one question that I had that I wanted to present to you after reading this, because this person basically says like, normally I can concentrate and I can focus and I've got no
Hmm.
problem with that, so I
Yeah.
don't really need it. And this is, I think, a very subjective answer that you're going to have to give, both of you. But how do you feel about that? How do you feel about, people that say, yeah, I don't need it? Yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, yeah, my thoughts on it are do you only want to try something out when you have a problem with something, or do you feel like you want to experiment on ways you can really improve stuff, even though you don't have a problem with it? I feel like it's still very cool and interesting to see if you can improve certain aspects of your work or your life. Um, so yeah, I think that that's really what this quote signals for me.
Yeah, I get that. Nice answer. Do you have anything to add,
Yes.
Asha?
So
Of course.
it's twofold. Those that say they don't need it, I always say I agree with you if that's their first instinct. And I say that because plant medicines call us. They call us when we need to go to the principal's office, and then we know when it's time to take a break. Anyone that's engaged with plant medicines enough knows now's the time, now's not the time. And so if you feel it's not the time, it's not the time for whatever reason, even if it's just a gut instinct, and that's fine. But then on the other hand, when you do engage, there are other consequences, not only because you said that some of them had some physical discomforts, and it kind of makes me think that they were still looking for their sweet spot. So while you're experimenting, you're going to get into a place where you've taken more than your ideal dose and you kind of feel a little queasy and a little anxious and a little whatever. But sometimes that can also manifest as being extra emotional, not fun. You don't want to burst into tears at work either. But it happens, and that's because things just need to come out. If you're doing things like exercising and journaling, you're not likely to burst into tears at work, just to kind of give people a disclaimer. But if you're taking more and you're not guided and you're not really sure what you're doing, and then you take, whatever you found somewhere, because suppliers is another conversation, you could find that emotions come to the surface, and that can be difficult. Or memories, dream patterns are going to change. You're not going to get what you ask for, you're going to get what you need. Now, that's a Pandora's box. It's like you have to be ready and willing, even on a small microdose level, to step
Yeah,
into that space and get your upgrade of like showing up to the bus stop and say, okay, I'm willing. Let's see where this takes me.
yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah, you have to feel really comfortable with trying something out, of course. Um, and if you start microdosing, they always say just start low, go slow. Those are really important things to keep in mind. Definitely.
Take your take your first dose
Yeah.
on a day off. Don't do it when you have important meetings with, the CEO of your company about whether or not you're going to keep your
That is
job.
what I say.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. All right. Hey, there's another thing that stood out for me, and you already named it, and that was the way people perceive stress within the work environment. And you said that this was one of the more significant findings when speaking to the microdosing group, was that they said they felt maybe a lift in mood, but what I saw from the quotes, and I would like to read too, was a pretty significant amount of, a pretty significant change in how they perceive stress. So here's the first one. I was no longer focused on that I have to finish all of it quickly. I have a high workload, especially in financial administration, which always requires hard work. But now, in those moments, I think to myself, okay, I know the mountain that lies ahead, but let's approach it calmly. And that means simply having less stress. And another one of the participants stated, additionally, I often felt a bit less stressed. For example, Monday mornings, which are usually quite hectic, I would normally immediately feel stressed. Not heavily stressed, but just a gut feeling of, oh, we've got a lot of stuff to do. But now my mind was a bit calmer. And while you didn't find um, significant changes in company turnover, or changes in how profitable the business is within a short
Mhm.
time frame like that, I can imagine that the atmosphere in the work floor, on the work floor, is heavily dependent on how stressed your colleagues are and how stressed yourself are. That this might have positive benefits down the line. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts,
of
Bodhi?
course, definitely, definitely. That's also a reason I think why employee satisfaction is such a really major thing. Um, and yeah, both in your private life and your work life, it's a major factor for every company, I would say. Um, so yeah, definitely. And one of the participants also mentioned that they didn't experience a important collective change such as turnover in this period, but they said, well, it could really be the case that if we would try it for a longer period of time, that uh, more visible changes would arise. So. Yeah, even though there was nothing at this point in time in my research, of course, it's a really yeah, it can really be the case in another company or for a longer period of time. Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice. And I was happy seeing this because it's also in line with more recent studies that have shown um, that rats who they let microdose are have a significantly decreased stress response. So they become way more resilient to stressors while they're microdosing on a similar schedule as well the standard schedule of the Fadiman Protocol. And those changes in behavior also in the study that I'm mentioning, those changes in behavior also translated to changes in brain structure that they found in the rats, specifically changes in a structure in the brain called the PVC. And that one is directly related to how resilient we are to stress, or how resilient the rats are in this case to stress. So it's nice that that research is in line with the findings that you had with the participants in your study that state that they are, well, not as stressed
Yeah,
as usually.
interesting study as well you're mentioning. Um, and can I ask you the question, how if you look at the landscape of all the literature that is currently available, what are certain directions that you are excited about in terms of the scientific microdosing literature?
Um, well, there's a few things. So personally, for me, I am most excited about everything that has to do with neuroplasticity. I feel like neuroplasticity is a key player in behavioral change. And coming from a clinical background, because my normal work is working as a therapist, um, coming from a clinical background, I would want to have all my clients to have the most optimal levels of neuroplasticity available to them whenever we start going into therapy, because that would make it way easier for them to learn new behavior, adapt to difficult situations, to step outside of the box, to break through stuck patterns, so to say. So that's the part that I'm really excited about, and that we get to see more and more of. Also, this study with the rats that I just mentioned basically proves neuroplasticity in this case. Um, yeah, there's other studies as well that are more linked to more clinical uses of microdosing. So there's studies going on about microdosing for people with ADHD. There's studies with microdosing for anxiety and for depression, where also the one of the latest studies in that checked out microdosing and depression found that the responses to microdosing were bigger if people were more
Mm.
depressed. So the higher people scored on depression, the more improvements they would see, or the more effects the bigger the effect of the microdose was compared to people who had very low scores on depression. Those people wouldn't feel that much of a lift in mood. So let's say, for example, someone who's depressed who would score their life satisfaction at the moment a 3 might go to 6. So that's a 3 point increase, but someone who scores themselves a 6 wouldn't
Hmm.
go to 9. but then they would for example, go to 7 or 7.5, something like that, right? Which is important stuff to know because we can use that in deciding, which cases would benefit most from microdosing at a certain point in time.
Really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. But besides that, I love research like the one that you did because, as you said in the beginning, so much of it is being done in lab settings. And lab settings, I find, are sometimes difficult to translate to real life situations. So, cognitive tests on creativity in the lab while you're giving someone a microdose might not elicit much of a significant change. But people find these moments of creativity while they're microdosing in everyday life exactly in the places where they didn't expect them to find it. Right? They find suddenly problem or solutions to problems in way different ways, and it might be hard to capture those things in a lab setting with a standardized test that should measure everything the same for
Yeah,
everyone.
yeah, on a particular day and in a particular mood of a participant. Um, yeah, and I
Yeah,
feel like
exactly.
lab settings obviously are great to really zoom in on certain properties of a substance of microdosing. But yeah, while we're using it in our daily lives, it's I feel like it's really important to also take into account those environments, those situations that we do it in.
Yeah, definitely. Within academia, we've kind of strayed towards a one type of approach, and I'm happy to see actually because this happens a lot within the research on psychedelics in general. That there's a bigger shift towards more qualitative research as well to provide additional information to everything that's found in the lab settings. Yeah, I think Asha wanted to add something.
Um, I agree with that. This whole silo of science always makes my hair curl. So I totally agree in terms of, having a more organic, quote unquote, holistic experience. But it also brings up, what are the metrics of success and what are the tools and devices that we're measuring? And so there's a lot of benefits that are not necessarily balance sheet line items, so we probably can't measure morale or performance yet. And I say yet because I want to ask you, when did the month long experiment end, so that we have an idea of of how long it's been since you're going to catch up with them. And also, it would be interesting to catch up with them maybe in another year,
Hmm.
retroactively look back and think, okay, within this 6 month period during the experiment and 5 months after, did
Hmm.
we have interesting product innovation? Did we have new strategic solutions? Was there, because that stuff kind of reveals itself more after the fact, like in your
Yeah.
personal experience after the microdosing. So potentially going a year into the future, maybe 2 years into the future, it'd be interesting to have a conversation with the founders and any remaining employees and say, what do you remember about this 6 month time period, if
Hmm.
anything? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that would be really interesting. Yeah, the experiment was in June of last year, if I got it correct. So yeah, how many months
But
after
6 months, yeah.
the 6 months? Yeah, yeah, 6 months after the experiment. But yeah, good idea. Maybe we should do it every year from now on.
If it's the same people, it would be interesting. Did they resume microdosing? Did the non-microdosers start microdosing? Has the company changed direction, changed culture? Has there been some kind of a fork in the road that's discernible?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, maybe all the non-microdosing employees at that time also tried microdosing, and maybe that's yeah gave rise to a new movement within the company. Yeah, interesting points.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, Bodhi, I'm curious because you had your own experiences with microdosing, and then I take it that people around you people in your environment have been microdosing as well, as well we often see. I think as well in this company that once one person starts microdosing and they find that they like it and has positive effects on them, that people around them start microdosing as well. I think by now all of my friends have microdosed, and my parents have been microdosing, and friends of my parents after them. So it kind of snowballs on. But that aside, for you doing this study, did you find anything that surprised you, or that kind of caught you off guard, like speaking to the employees, hearing something like, oh wow, actually this is new to me, or I didn't expect this to happen?
Um, yeah, good question. Um, well, I think what surprised me at first was that this company was so open about microdosing, because I've looked around a lot. I've talked to many people who own a startup, but the stigma is still huge on microdosing, I feel like. Um, so yeah, it appeared pretty difficult to get into a group of people where they were open about it, where they have tried it and wanted to talk and try it with colleagues. So it was really cool to experience this with this startup. Um, but still, they were hesitant to talk with family, with friends about it, and definitely with external parties, with other companies that they collaborate with. So they really try to keep it informal and within the company, which was logical, but it was an interesting dynamic that I've experienced. Um, and maybe what I found interesting as well is that placebo is always a big thing with microdosing, especially with people who didn't try it, I feel like. But it was fun to hear from the respondents that at first they expected a placebo effect, and then the first 1 or 2 days they were like, yeah, the placebo effect could really be a prominent factor in my feeling in the first few days, because they were coming to the office and they were joking about it, and so they were a little bit giggly and stuff like that. But after a few microdosing days, they kind of forgot about it in a way, in that they did it in the morning and they felt really good during the day. They had a really productive day, for example, and then they closed the laptop and they were like, "Wow, what a good day!" And then they thought, "Oh, it might be the microdosing." So um, that for me was a good example that a placebo plays a role, maybe in the first few days, but once you are really, yeah, you feel safe, you feel accustomed to it, then it doesn't play a role anymore. So that was, yeah, an interesting part for me.
Yeah,
You
nice.
exactly defined how to know that you've hit your sweet spot. And that's basically, and I'm a little bit cryptic and woo woo sometimes. And I tell people in the beginners group coaching call that it's a little bit like falling in love. You just know, which I know is not helpful. I
Yeah,
know, but it's true. And it's kind of like you said, you close your laptop, you had a really good day, and then you remember you microdosed. That's your dose.
yeah,
That's
Yeah, you're not usually going through the day thinking like, oh man, this
no,
microdose is really
no,
hitting me
no,
today, you know?
that's not.
No, no. Which I think, I mean, it's good to note, because I do believe that this is how a lot of people that have no experience with microdosing
Or expect.
think, feel yeah, think that that's what it's like. And oftentimes, there's so many first timers that, if I guide them or Asha has them in the group, one of the most common questions is, when does it hit? Like, when does it start to work? And then, we have to tell them like, yeah,
mm,
it doesn't really,
Opposed
not like having a glass of wine and feeling rosy from it, or not like taking other substances that have a very significant effect on you. This one is more subtle, and you don't know at the moment, like, ooh. Well, if you feel that, then you have gone past your sweet spot.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. I can talk about
Yeah,
this for hours and days. Don't
yeah,
get me started. Uh,
yeah. I have one more question for Bodhi. Um, this just came up as we were talking about this. You said that one of the negative effects that people reported were physical discomforts, like feeling jittery, feeling restless, stuff like that. And I think Asha rightfully pointed out that that seems like people who have not found their sweet spot, who have been taking too
Hmm.
much, usually, is when they find these kinds of um, when they run into these kinds of feelings and troubles, as we may call them. Um, these people, they all started by themselves, right?
What do you mean by themselves?
Well, I'm curious. Like, do you think that this group of people could have had an advantage if they would have started, for example, with a coaching call or with some more guidance?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's very, very possible. They received these guidelines for how to use it, and the start low, go slow. They heard everything about it, but still, I think guidance in a personal way adds a completely different layer to it. Um, I don't personally have experience with this personal guidance. I started on my own as well. Um, but I feel like in these kinds of situations at work, it's pretty important that you don't have these days where you take a too large of dose. Um, so yeah, I think guidance in these kinds of situations are really important and could be really beneficial. Yeah,
Yeah, to smoothen
yeah,
out the process a little
yeah.
bit.
yeah, I was thinking the same thing in terms of like how much did they know about finding their sweet spot and their individual bumpy roads
Mm-hmm.
to get
Mm-hmm.
to where they needed to be. Like it's great that they read some literature, but it might have been interesting to see if they had a phone number to call or somebody to reach out to. That would
Yeah,
have been an interesting
yeah,
thing. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That was me, but I didn't get any calls. So yeah,
Nice, nice. Good news as well.
So we're going to leave
All
it
right,
there for today, but
Bodhi.
I definitely want to catch up with you and find out about their update and their follow up.
yeah,
So we'll definitely do a part two to this conversation whenever you're ready so that we can find out a little bit more about their long term experience and see what that does. I think that'll be very interesting information.
yeah. Awesome. Let's keep in touch.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the
Cool,
time. Thank
Bodhi.
you, Jai. Love your brain. Thank you for making it useful to us today, making it available. Always obliged. Brody,
Yeah, you're very welcome. And if I can add to that, thank you again, Bodhi, for not only being here on this podcast, but for bringing this research out there. I think it's very valuable. And I'm very happy to have had the time with you to kind of pick your brain on the things that you found and the stuff that you wrote. Very insightful. Thank you for that. And I would love to hear more from you in the
Thanks,
future.
guys. Thanks for the kind words, and thanks for your time as well.
keep up the good work. We'll catch up with you very soon. Cheers,
Cool.
guys.
Talk to you guys. Bye bye.
Bye bye.